The sharp crack of a crystal glass hitting the marble floor rang out, shattering into hundreds of pieces, and for a fleeting moment, the ballroom fell silent. An unexpected moment of chaos, like an omen of the storm to come. Amidst the glittering gowns and polished black tuxedos, Aurora Miles, a woman with a calm presence and proud eyes, stepped through the gilded doors of the Whitford estate. And here, in the place where the powerful believed they held the world in their hands, she was about to make them question that very belief. Aurora, 36 years old, CEO of the tech conglomerate Axiom Nova, one of the names rewriting the global rules, appeared tonight with a purpose that seemed simple: to finalize a $900 million deal with the Whitford dynasty, a financial empire spanning centuries. But for her, this was never just a transaction. It was the summit she had climbed through prejudice, mocking laughter, and countless doors slammed in her face, all to prove that her radiant brown skin could never define her worth. The moment Aurora stepped onto the marble steps, every gaze turned toward her. Whispers rippled through the room like an electric current. A platinum-haired woman wearing a gleaming string of pearls tilted her lips into a cold smile. Nearby, other eyes shimmered with surprise, laced with doubt, as though Aurora's presence was a paradox at a gathering of the white and powerful. She noticed them all, yet her stride remained steady, the rhythm of her heels against the stone floor echoing like the beat of war drums. Behind her composed smile, her heart thundered, both racing with expectation and aching with the sting of past humiliations. In her eyes, a quiet pride burned bright. She had not come as a guest, but as the one holding the key to the future of two empires. From a distance, Damien Whitford, 34 years old and the sole heir, tracked her every step. His face was handsomely cold, but his grey eyes gleamed with mockery. Damien had been raised in a world where everyone bowed. Tonight, watching a young woman of colour walk into his ancestral estate to sit as an equal at a billion-dollar table, he could not restrain his disdain. Aurora approached the head table, where Edward Whitford, 68 years old, patriarch of the family, with his silver hair perfectly groomed, sat waiting. The ballroom held its breath, anticipating the symbolic handshake. But just then, Damien's voice cut through, clear and sly, slicing into the air. Is someone mistaken? Did they bring in the help this early? The words struck like a cold blade through the elegant scene. Guests gaped, then a few nervous laughs slipped out, sharp as needles piercing Aurora. Glasses clinked together in awkward solidarity. Complicit in her humiliation, Aurora faltered for a single heartbeat. Her chest tightened, her cheeks burned. Every early morning, every sleepless night spent fighting for bids, every deal where she had to battle twice as hard just to be heard, all of it collapsed into this bitter instant. Her eyes sought Edward, hoping the patriarch would dismiss his son's insolence. But Edward remained still, his eyes somber, weighing justice against family honor. He chose silence. In that silence, Aurora caught the faint sighs of a few young onlookers, the murmurs of discomfort. But no one rose, no voice dared protest. Only complicity hung over the hall like a mourning shroud. Swallowing her rising pain, Aurora's face softened into a serene smile. It was not joy, but the last weapon she held, her self-control. She adjusted the collar of her navy suit, lifted her head high. No retort, no pleading glance, only silence, a silence heavy as thunder. She turned to Edward, offering a graceful nod, both courteous and final. The sound of her heels struck again, this time bold, defiant. Aurora walked away from the table, leaving behind scrutinizing eyes, hollow laughter, and Damien's arrogance. Damien raised his glass, his gaze triumphant. He believed he had vanquished an outsider. But he did not know that in that very moment, Aurora had planted the spark of a war he could never command. Her heart was tangled with pain, yet her face remained composed. She thought of the women who had been humiliated in public, of the men cast out of boardrooms for their origins. She knew she stood not just for herself. Each step she took was a declaration. Dignity is never for sale. Near the grand entrance, Aurora paused. She turned, scanning the ballroom one last time, her gaze sweeping across every face before locking on to Damien. He shivered faintly, his hand tightening on the glass, a tremor betraying him, even as his smile held. Aurora's own smile was faint, yet it carried an ocean of contempt. As the heavy doors closed behind her, the hall fell into a suffocating vacuum. Guests lowered their eyes, some ashamed, others avoiding each other's gaze. Damien smirked, convincing himself of victory. But deep within, a crack had formed, a fracture whose destructive force he could not yet fathom. Outside, the night air cooled Aurora's skin. She drew a long breath, exhaling the tightness in her chest. A sleek black sedan waited under the golden lights. She stepped in, closing the door with quiet resolve. In that instant, sorrow gave way to steel. She knew the true battle was only just beginning. Night fell over Los Angeles like a heavy velvet curtain, the dazzling lights of the Whitford estate glowing behind Aurora Miles. But inside her was a deep, motionless void. The sedan sped forward, gliding past rows of tall palms, leaving behind the hollow laughter of the banquet. Inside the car, Aurora sat still, her hands clutching her jacket tightly, as if to restrain her pounding heartbeat. Damien's insult still echoed in her head, not just as words, but as a bell-toll, awakening memories she thought were buried. She remembered the long, cold corridors at Stanford, where she walked in cheap shoes among a sea of designer coats, the giggles behind her, the eyes silently declaring she did not belong. On those days, Aurora swore she would never bow her head, never let anyone decide her worth based on skin color. The sudden vibration of her phone cut through her thoughts. On the screen appeared the name, Harold Knox, chairman. Aurora hesitated for a moment, then answered, "We need to talk now, Aurora." Harold's voice pressed, deepened by age but lined with worry. "The rumors from the party are spreading. I've had 3 calls from financial papers and more than a dozen messages from board members. They want answers." Aurora closed her eyes, hearing the rush of blood in her temples. "I understand. I will meet the board tomorrow morning." Silence lingered on the line. Then Harold sighed. "Aurora, you know how critical this deal is. $900 million, a historic turning point. Don't let emotions get in the way. We cannot lose this." Aurora bit her lip. She wanted to fight back, to scream that this was not emotion. This was dignity. But her throat locked tight. She only answered, "Tomorrow I will explain." The call ended, leaving a suffocating silence in the car. Aurora leaned back, watching the city lights stream backward through the window, blurred into her sorrow. The phone rang again. This time it was Lena Park, vice president, and her closest friend for nearly a decade. Aurora picked up. Lena's voice trembled. "Aurora, the news is spreading fast. The board is in chaos. They fear Whitford will pull out unless you apologize, or at least find a way to smooth things over." Aurora let out a bitter laugh. "Apologize? Lena, he insulted me in front of everyone, and his father sat in silence. I can't, you may not be able to, Lena interrupted, voice breaking. But the board sees it differently. Some are pushing for an emergency vote to reverse your decision. They say if you hold firm, we will lose this chance. Lose the future. Aurora went quiet. For a moment, she felt crushed between two massive stones, one side her principles, the other the weight of survival. Lena, she said slowly, her voice hoarse. You know how we built Axiom Nova. Not with Whitford's money, but with belief, with people who trusted that technology could break barriers and create fairness. If I bend today, everything we've built will collapse. Silence filled the line, then a long, weary sigh. I understand. But Aurora, are you sure you can withstand this pressure? Aurora shut her eyes. In the darkness, she saw Damien's arrogant face, then Edward's cold and unmoving stare. The pain swelled, then dissolved into a single thought. If I retreat, I betray myself. No, Lena, I won't retreat. When the call ended, Aurora set the phone on the seat, sitting in silence. She thought of the thousands of employees working under the roof of Axiom Nova, of the faces who believed in her. She thought of her parents, whose hands had been worn raw to raise her through school while enduring scorn in poor southern towns. In her mind rose a voice, not from anyone else, but from her 18-year-old self. Never let them decide who you are. The sedan stopped in front of her penthouse downtown. Aurora stepped out, the night deep around her. The city air was colder than usual, carrying a hint of sea wind. She looked up at the sky, the stars dim against the electric glow, yet she still found one faint light. Inside the penthouse, Aurora removed her coat and sank into a chair. The silence was so profound she could hear the ticking clock, but the phone kept flashing with messages from board members, from the press, from partners, all demanding. One message from Harold glared. Tomorrow morning you must give a clear answer. The company is on the edge. Aurora stared at the screen. Inside her, a storm raged. She could save the deal, protect the stock price, appease everyone if she swallowed the humiliation. But that would destroy everything she had fought for all her life. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness, but from crushing pressure. She recalled the moment she entered the Whitford estate, the doubtful eyes upon her. Then Damien's words like a blade. She felt the wound of past and present fuse into one, yet she rose and walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed, skyscrapers rising in the distance, monuments to resilience and ambition. Aurora wiped her tears, her gaze hardening again. Inside her, a vow resounded. Tomorrow I will choose, and I will choose not for money, but for dignity. The clock struck midnight. Aurora knew the morning meeting would be the decisive turning point, not only for Axiom Nova, but for the very meaning of human worth. Dawn broke over Los Angeles, but for Aurora Miles, the light carried no peace. She had not slept all night, her eyes shadowed, yet her spirit sharper than ever. This morning she would face the board of directors, men and women desperate to salvage a $900 million deal, even if it meant burying the shame of the night before. The glass doors of the 47th floor boardroom at Axiom Nova opened. Inside, a polished ebony table stretched long, rows of black leather chairs aligned neatly. On the wall, electronic screens streamed market news, and just below them, tense faces stared in silence. 11 board members, every gaze sharp with accusation. The air was dense, compressed like a storm waiting to break. Aurora entered, dressed in a sleek ash-grey suit. Her steps were calm, but each stride rumbled like thunder in her chest. Heads turned. Some exhaled in relief that she had arrived. Others frowned, eyes piercing, testing her resolve. At the head of the table sat Harold Knox, 72, chairman of the board. His gaze toward Aurora was urgent, yet uncertain. To his left was Julian Reyes, 52, the CFO, his face as stern as stone. Across from him sat Vivian Cho, 60 years old, a veteran board member, her eyes gleaming with cold pragmatism. Aurora stood at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on the wood. Her voice rose, deep and steady. You all know what happened last night at the Whitford estate. I will not evade it. But I will also not let this company sell its soul for a $900 million check. A wave of murmurs broke out. Julian shot to his feet, his chair screeching backward. Aurora, are you joking? This is the largest deal in Axiom Nova's history. You do not have the authority to cancel it unilaterally. The stock will plummet. Aurora turned her gaze on him, calm, unshaken. Julian, precisely because I am accountable to our shareholders, I must speak clearly. We cannot partner with a family that openly humiliated us in front of hundreds of witnesses. If we stay silent, it means we accept. And once we accept, Axiom Nova's honor is gone. Vivian let out a thin, cold laugh. Honor? That is nothing but emotional theater. Business is not about emotion. We need money, investment, market share. A public apology from Whitford is more than enough. Aurora shook her head, her neatly tied hair shifting, her eyes blazing with conviction. No, Vivian. This is not emotion. This is a principle. An apology after public humiliation does not erase the truth. If we sign today, then tomorrow anyone can treat us with the same disdain. The value of this company is not $900 million. It is the trust that here, people are respected. Her words struck the table like a hammer. The room froze in silence for a few seconds. Then Harold tapped his pen gently, his voice low. Aurora, I understand you. I know you never compromise. But are you sure shareholders and the market will see it that way? They will not see the insult. They will only see the stock price fall. Aurora turned to him, her eyes softening, but her tone ironclad. Mr. Knox, if we build Axiom Nova only on stock value, it will collapse in the first storm. But if we build on honor, on integrity, this company will stand for a century. Julian slammed his palm on the table, nearly shouting, You are gambling with the future of thousands of employees. A CEO has no right to let ego rule an entire corporation. Aurora fixed her gaze on him, unwavering. Her voice dropped, cold as steel. You are mistaken, Julian. This is not ego. This is the dignity we all share. If we allow others to demean us, then tomorrow no one will respect Axiom Nova. The air tightened, stretched like a string ready to snap. Some board members sat frozen, their eyes shifting, unable to decide. Outside the glass, sunlight poured over the building, in stark contrast to the gloom within. Aurora inhaled deeply, then delivered her verdict. As CIO, I officially declare that Axiom Nova withdraws from the deal with Whitford Group. I accept full responsibility, even if the stock falls, even if I lose my position. But I will never sell our honor. Her words cracked like lightning across a clear sky. The boardroom shook. Julian's mouth fell open, his face flushed with fury. Vivian shook her head, eyes glinting with scorn, but the others they remained silent. Some lowered their heads, Some looked at Aurora with a strange mixture of fear and respect. Harold sat motionless, his pen stilled in his hand. His aged eyes lingered on Aurora for a long moment. Then he gave a slight nod, as if conceding. Perhaps this truly was the decisive moment in the company's history. Aurora gathered her papers, her voice calm. "This meeting is adjourned. I will prepare the press release this afternoon. You may disagree, but I believe history will judge fairly." She turned and walked away. The sound of her heels echoed across the boardroom floor, not hurried, not trembling, but steady as war drums. When the door closed behind her, the room sank into heavy silence. Outside, the hallway stretched long, endless. Aurora walked on, her heart quaking but without regret. She knew this decision would unleash a storm, but it would also define who she was. And at that very moment, across the city, Damien Whitford sat in his opulent office, lips curling into a smile. He had just received word that Aurora had pulled out of the deal. In his eyes, it was nothing less than an admission of defeat. But Damien was wrong. He did not yet know that from this decision, a media tsunami was about to rise, one that would not only sweep away the Whitford family's honor, but also lift Aurora into an untouchable symbol. That afternoon, the Los Angeles sky was a clear blue, the sunlight blazing like gold across the glass towers. But inside Axiom Nova headquarters, the atmosphere was heavy, like a storm about to break. Dozens of reporters, journalists, and cameras crowded the main hall. Flashbulbs fired endlessly, the low hum of recorders rising like a swarm of bees. On the podium, the Axiom Nova logo gleamed behind the microphone, waiting. Everyone was there for one moment alone. Aurora Miles, the CEO who had just shocked the world by pulling out of a $900 million deal with the Whitford Group. The backstage door opened. Aurora emerged. A pristine white suit shaped her frame, her hair tied neatly high, her face free of elaborate makeup, leaving only the fire in her eyes. For an instant, the entire room fell silent. She walked to the microphone, her heels striking in sharp, deliberate rhythm. Her heart pounded, but her voice rose calm and steady, each word falling like carved stone. "My dignity is never for sale at any price." The room exploded. Cameras fired in rapid bursts. Reporters muttered feverishly, some nearly springing to their feet. Aurora lifted her hand gently, signaling for silence. Her gaze swept the crowd as if piercing straight into each soul. "I, Aurora Miles, officially declare that Axiom Nova withdraws from the partnership with Whitford Group. This decision was not easy, but it was necessary, because we believe the future cannot be built on humiliation and disrespect." A wave of sound surged. Reporters raised their hands, microphones thrust forward. Aurora nodded to the first question. "Ms. Miles, many shareholders fear this decision will cause Axiom Nova's stock to plummet. Do you not think you are placing emotion above financial interest?" Aurora held steady, her eyes unshaken. "Our shareholders invest in Axiom Nova, not only for profit. They invest because they believe in the mission and the core values of this company. Profits can be lost and regained. But once dignity is lost, it can never be restored." Behind her, Lena Park, vice president and longtime friend, stood silently. Her heart tightened in worry for Aurora, yet her eyes shone with pride. A female reporter stood, her tone sharp. "Some say this decision is too emotional. If one personal insult can drive you to cancel $1 billion deal, are you truly clear-headed enough to lead a global corporation?" Aurora gave a faint smile, cold at the edges. "If defending the dignity of myself and of thousands of employees is emotional, then I will gladly bear that label. I believe business is not only about numbers, it is about people, and people must be respected. Her words echoed across the hall. A brief silence followed, then scattered applause, growing louder, swelling into a wave. Not everyone joined, but enough to prove that Aurora had struck a chord. Elsewhere, in the glass office of the Whitford estate, Damien Whitford watched the press conference on a massive screen. His face twisted in rage. The wine glass in his hand trembled. She dared to challenge us publicly like this, he growled, eyes burning red. His father, Edward Whitford, sat beside him, silent. But the deep furrow etched across his brow revealed what he already knew. This battle was slipping beyond their control. Back in the hall, Aurora stood firm, her figure unyielding like a pillar in the storm of media. Another reporter pushed to the microphone. "Ms. Miles, what final message do you want to send to young entrepreneurs who also face discrimination and pressure from powerful forces?" Aurora lowered her voice, staring into the lens as though speaking directly to each heart beyond it. No one has the right to define your worth based on skin color, gender, or origin. True success is not measured by the money in your account, but by how much dignity you preserve in your hardest moments. The hall fell silent. Then thunderous applause erupted, rolling like a storm. Cameras clicked, voices shouted, but Aurora remained still, her eyes shining not with personal pride, but with the knowledge that her words had transcended her own story and become a voice for millions who had been demeaned. Behind the stage, Lena brushed tears from her eyes, whispering to herself, "Aurora, you did what so few dare to do." Aurora stepped down from the podium. The flash of cameras still chased her, but she did not turn back. Each step felt lighter, as though the unbearable weight of years had fallen away. But across the city, Damien Whitford hurled his glass against the wall, shards scattering. He shouted, "She thinks she's won. Let's see when the market turns against her, if she still dares to be arrogant." Damien did not know. A hidden tide was already rising, and in the dark halls of the Whitford estate, a few servants had captured the humiliation of the night before. The clip was only 2 minutes long, but it was about to detonate like a media bomb, tearing apart the facade the Whitfords had built with wealth and glamour. Aurora left the hall surrounded by reporters, but peace did not follow her. She knew that what had happened today was only the beginning. The real storm still lay ahead. Night fell over the city like a heavy black shroud, but social media blazed like fire. Just hours after Aurora Miles's press conference, a 2-minute clip surfaced on a small forum and spread like an uncontrollable storm. The images were sharp. The lavish ballroom of the Whitford estate. Damien Whitford, dressed in a black tuxedo, raised his champagne glass with a mocking grin. His words cut through the air, ringing out clearly. "Is someone mistaken? Did they bring the servant in this early?" No commentary was needed. Aurora's face filled the frame, pausing for a heartbeat, then offering a graceful smile with proud eyes. The brief clip was enough to make viewers' hearts ache. Within one night, the video surpassed 10 million views. The hashtag #RespectIsPriceless shot straight to #1 worldwide. Comments flooded in. "I can't believe this is how a billionaire family treats a black CEO. Aurora Miles, you are not alone. We stand with you." The media erupted. Major networks from CNN, BBC to Al Jazeera ran urgent headlines. Talk shows, podcasts, social platforms, everywhere dissected the clip. From New York to London, from Johannesburg to Seoul, Millions shared their outrage. Inside Whitford Group's offices, the situation hit like an earthquake. The communications floor was in chaos, phones ringing off the hook, inboxes overflowing with demands for interviews and statements. On the stock exchange, Whitford shares plunged without breaks. In a single morning, billions of dollars in market value evaporated. Damien slammed the table so hard his glass shattered. His face flushed red, sweat pouring down. "Who dared record that? Who betrayed me?" he shouted, a beast cornered. But the truth was clear. It was not betrayal. It was his own arrogance that destroyed him. Meanwhile, in her apartment, Aurora sat quietly before her laptop, the blue glow washing over her weary face. Every passing second, her phone vibrated with dozens of messages from communities, non-profits, strangers across the globe. All carried the same sentiment. "Thank you for standing up." Lena Park rushed into the living room, clutching her tablet, eyes blazing. "Aurora, you have to see this. The video has hit 25 million views in just 12 hours. Whitford Group is in unprecedented crisis. Partner corporations are pulling out in droves." Aurora lifted her head, her eyes deep. She did not smile, did not cheer. She only exhaled softly. "Lena, this is no longer about me and Damien. This is the voice of millions who have been demeaned. I am just the spark." At Whitford headquarters, Edward Whitford convened an emergency meeting. The luxurious room was now drenched in tension. Senior executives shouted, fists pounding the oak table. Hundreds of pages of media reports were scattered before them. A trembling PR director stood and said, "We are losing control. The family's image is destroyed. Without immediate action, the entire empire could collapse." Edward stared at his son, eyes burning with both anger and disappointment. "Damien, do you realize a single foolish remark has dragged this family into the abyss?" Damien's voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. "It was just a joke. People are overreacting." Edward's fist slammed down, his voice booming like thunder. No, it was not a joke. It was naked arrogance, and now the whole world has seen it. As Whitford reeled, outside the headquarters, hundreds gathered in protest. Banners waved high. "Dignity is priceless and no more bigotry." Chants roared, drums and horns creating a fierce anthem of outrage. Fashion houses, banks, media conglomerates, once long-time partners, issued statements reconsidering their ties. The shockwaves rippled across global markets. Headlines branded it the most severe crisis in Whitford history. In her apartment, Aurora remained composed. Yet deep down, she knew the weight pressing down. Praise could swiftly turn into a double-edged sword. She had to tread carefully, for one misstep could see it all unravel. Lena looked at her, voice catching. "Aurora, don't you see? The whole world is with you. This is a historic moment." Aurora stayed silent, but her eyes shone with resolve. She knew the battle had only just begun. From this day forward, her name would not be tied to a single company, but to a movement. Across the city, Damien stood before a mirror, staring at himself with haunted eyes. In the reflection, for the first time, he saw that the arrogant man he had been had become someone despised by the world. And in that moment, Damien grasped a bitter truth. True power did not lie in a champagne glass or a centuries-old crest, but in the dignity he had scorned. Dawn had not yet broken, but on the floor of Wall Street, the electronic boards were already burning red. Whitford Group shares plunged straight down, losing 18% in just the first 2 hours of trading. Brokers shouted, phones rang without pause, waves of sell orders crashed through like a tsunami. A financial empire once solid as stone now trembled like a castle of sand. In the emergency boardroom of Whitford headquarters, the air was as thick as a courtroom. Every eye fixed on Edward Whitford, 68 years old, patriarch of the family, his silver hair framing a face etched with exhaustion. On the massive screen behind him, charts glowed blood red. At his side, Thomas Gallagher, 70 years old, chairman of the board and Edward's longtime ally, slammed his hand on the table. We have no choice. Damien must be suspended immediately. If not, this company will collapse within days. Damien sat a few seats away, his face pale but his eyes blazing. You cannot do this to me. This is my family's company. I am the sole heir. A few members let out cold laughter. Thomas replied icily, You are not this company, Damien. You are the cause of its disaster. Damien shot up, his chair clattering backward. All this over one clip. A joke. You are all cowards. Edward rose suddenly. His voice was not loud, but each word struck with the weight of a hammer. Enough, Damien. You did this. One sentence, one moment of arrogance, and now our family's entire legacy teeters on the edge of ruin. Damien spun toward his father, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling. Father, you too, turning your back on me? Edward gave no answer, only a long, hard look. That gaze was cold and heavy, as final as a verdict without appeal. Thomas spoke firmly. As chairman of the board, I declare, Damien Whitford is hereby suspended from all positions and responsibilities until the investigation is complete and public trust is restored. The room fell into suffocating silence. Damien's mouth hung open, then twisted into a bitter laugh. You will regret this. Every one of you, he hissed, then stormed out, slamming the door. Outside headquarters, the crowd of protesters grew thicker. Banners and placards rose high. Dignity is priceless, and boycott Whitford. Chants thundered, broadcast live across social media, millions watching worldwide. In the distance, major news outlets had cameras set, streaming every development. In her apartment, Aurora Miles watched it all on the television screen. She sat motionless, hands clasped around a cup of cold tea. Lena Park stood beside her, voice breaking. Aurora, don't you see? They are collapsing. But aren't we afraid? Because this wave could sweep Axiom Nova into it too. Aurora shook her head gently. No, Lena. This is no longer the story of one company. This is a test for all of us. The world needs to see that some things are not for sale. In that moment, Aurora was no longer just a CEO, but someone carrying a message on her shoulders. Every word she spoke, every action she took, could become either a weapon or a shield for millions who watched her. Across the city, Damien slammed shut the door of his private chamber in the Whitford estate. He struck the mirror with his fist, shards slicing into his hand, blood seeping out. In the fractured reflection, his face twisted with rage and fear. For the first time in his life, Damien felt small, powerless. From outside, the chants rolled in. No justice, no business, and respect over profit. The slogans pounded in his ears, punishing the arrogance that had defined him for so long. In an emergency press briefing, Thomas Gallagher announced to reporters, Whitford Group officially suspends Damien Whitford. We commit to an internal investigation and reforms to regain public trust. But his words did little to calm the storm. The Financial Times declared, This is not just a scandal. This is the deepest moral crisis the Whitfords have ever faced. Shares continued to plummet. Major investors pulled out. Television screens replayed scenes of protesters chanting in unison, Respect is priceless. Respect is priceless. Aurora watched the screen, emotions stirring within. She did not feel triumph, only a sharper clarity than ever before. When power is stripped of character, it destroys itself. That night, Damien sat alone in his darkened room, streetlight filtering through the blinds. Outside, the chants echoed. He whispered like a man broken. How did it come to this? It was only one sentence. But he knew the truth. It was never just one sentence. It was a lifetime of arrogance, a system built on contempt for human dignity, now laid bare as a public judgment before the world. As for Aurora, after a long day watching the turmoil unfold, she stepped out onto her balcony. The night wind lifted her hair, her eyes fixed on the glowing horizon. Within her, a quiet conviction burned. This storm was far from over. But from within it, a new path was about to emerge. The next morning, the offices of Axiom Nova were lit before dawn. In sharp contrast to the chaos at Whitford headquarters, where reporters crowded in and shareholders stormed to demand answers, the atmosphere inside Aurora Miles's building carried a new current of energy, urgent, but full of hope. Phones rang without pause. Inboxes overflowed with messages. Lena Park rushed from room to room, clutching a tablet packed with dozens of partnership offers. Spotting Aurora, she nearly panted from excitement. "Aurora, you won't believe this. We just received a proposal from Northbridge Industries, the largest telecom company in Europe. And here, Helios Capital is ready to make a long-term investment with no conditions attached. Even Wellington & Co., a financial giant known for its strict standards, has expressed a desire to join us." Aurora frowned slightly as she took the tablet. On the screen, each glowing logo came with words of respect. "We trust in the values you defend. Partnering with Axiom Nova is partnering with the future." She stood silent for a moment. Her heart stirred, yet her eyes stayed calm. Pride rippled through her, but so did caution. Aurora knew that true victory was not in replacing one partner with many new names. True victory was in keeping Axiom Nova on the path she had chosen. "Lena," she said in a steady tone, "this is not my victory alone. This is the victory of conviction, that dignity is worth more than money. But we must be careful. I will not partner with anyone who only wants to exploit our image." Lena nodded firmly, eyes shining. "I understand. But Aurora, look, you've changed the rules of the game. What Whitford dismissed, the world now respects." In that moment, Aurora felt as if all the years of struggle, all the humiliations endured, had converged into this point, to prove that resolve could tilt the balance of power. On the other side of the city, in the Whitford estate, Damien sat in shock in his private chamber. News crashed down like relentless waves, stock prices plunging, contracts cancelled, and now the very corporations once lining up at Whitford's door were standing in line for Aurora. He stared at his phone screen. A photo of Aurora and Lena smiling as they signed a memorandum with Northbridge Industries plastered across the press. The headline in bold read, "Aurora Miles, from humiliation to symbol of integrity, Axiom Nova, signs historic deal." Damien clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. In his chest, jealousy and fear twisted into a knot. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to lose everything. Not from defeat in business, but from defeat in the hearts of people. Edward Whitford entered, his steps heavy. His aging face carried disappointment too deep to hide. "Damien, do you see? Aurora Miles just turned a failed deal into a global movement. And all you have left is disgrace." Damien bit down hard, his voice shaking with fury. "I will take it all back. I won't let her win." Edward only shook his head, eyes heavy with sorrow. "No, Damien. It isn't about her winning or you losing. It's that you never understood where true strength lies." At Axiom Nova headquarters, Aurora continued her meetings with the strategy team. The room overflowed with documents, contracts, and draft agreements. Everyone wanted their name tied to Axiom Nova, now that Aurora had become a global symbol of integrity. A young marketing director spoke with excitement. "CEO, we should capitalize on this wave. If we launch a respect over profit campaign, the brand will explode." Aurora raised her hand firmly. "No, I will not turn pain and outrage into a marketing tool. We will choose partners because of shared values, not for media tricks." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, every look turned into respect. They realized Aurora was not only a CEO, she was a model of leading with dignity. By late afternoon, Aurora stepped onto the balcony as the sunset bathed the city in gold. Lena approached, handing her the final list of strategic partners. Aurora, in just 48 hours, the total value of offers has surpassed $1 billion, far beyond the Whitford deal. And every one of them emphasized the same thing. They are choosing us because of trust. Aurora gazed into the distance, her eyes steady. "Lena, this is not a reward for me. This is a responsibility. When the world places its trust in us, we must live worthy of it." At that moment, a strong gust swept across, carrying the chants from the square below, where crowds still gathered in support. Their banners blazed. "Dignity wins and Aurora Miles. We stand with you." Aurora drew a deep breath, emotions swelling with pride and apprehension. For she knew, the farther she went, the heavier the responsibility became. Yet that very weight made her steps more resolute. In the thickening night, Damien sat alone, an unfinished bottle of wine on the table. Outside, news reports streamed endlessly. Axiom Nova signing more partners, stocks soaring, while Whitford plummeted. He buried his face in his hands, feeling for the first time the loneliness swallowing him whole. A single question echoed in his mind, gnawing without end. Has true power never been in my hands, but in the very thing I always despised? In the stark contrast of two fates, Aurora lifting her head high beneath the sunset, and Damien drowning in darkness, the world began to understand. This was no longer a failed negotiation, but a revolution of values. Stage lights poured down like a golden waterfall, illuminating Aurora Miles's face. The vast hall with thousands of seats fell silent, as though time itself had stopped. The Global Leadership Forum, gathering the most powerful figures in business, politics, and society, now fixed every gaze on a woman who had weathered a storm of crisis and still stood tall with pride. Aurora stepped to the center of the stage in an elegant white suit, her eyes shining as if forged from steel. Her heart pounded, yet her voice, when it rose, was soft but firm, every word resonating. There are things in this world you can buy, but dignity is not one of them. A wave of emotion swept through the hall. People sat straighter, hands paused mid-note. Aurora let the silence hang, like a drumbeat in every chest. I once believed success was measured by contracts, by numbers in the millions and billions. But then, one evening, I realized everything can collapse because of a single insult. And in that moment, you have only two choices. Stay silent to keep the money, or stand up to keep yourself. Her gaze swept across the audience. In the front rows, Renowned business leaders frowned in thought. Further back, younger faces, students, entrepreneurs lit up with excitement, as if ignited by her fire. She lowered her voice, deep and steady. Whitford Group offered me a $900 million check, but along with it came a price, the cost of dignity. I chose to refuse. And from that decision, I learned that true success is not about numbers. It is about the ability to stand tall when the world tries to force you to your knees. Scattered applause rose. Aurora paused, took a deep breath, then shared her story. Memories of Stanford's lecture halls, the contemptuous stares, the mocking laughter. Her voice quickened, sharp as a blade, ripping through silence, exposing wounds many in the hall had once carried. I used to think that if I made enough money, I would be respected. But the truth is, no one gives you respect. You must rise. You must defend it yourself. And sometimes you pay a very high price. A stillness lingered, then thunderous applause erupted, spreading like a tidal wave. In the guest seats, actress and human rights activist Serena Lowell wiped away a tear, then rose to her feet, clapping. Cameras swung instantly toward her, capturing the moment, fanning the fire burning for Aurora. Aurora pressed on, her voice sharpening. Some say I was reckless, some say I was emotional. But I ask you this. If $1 billion deal can buy your silence, then tomorrow, what will be left in your heart but emptiness? Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy back the respect once lost. Behind the stage, Lena Park stood pressed against the wall, heart racing. She had heard Aurora speak of dignity 1,000 times. But today, standing before thousands, Aurora seemed transformed into a living symbol, no longer just the friend who once shared sleepless nights. The hall roared with applause, relentless. Some in the audience wept. Many young people raised their phones, live streaming her every word. The hashtag #The Cost of Dignity soared instantly to #1 worldwide on Twitter. In the dark room of the Whitford estate, Damien Whitford watched the speech on a giant screen. His face twisted, the wine glass in his hand trembling. Each word Aurora spoke struck like an arrow into his chest. Who does she think she is? An outsider, daring to lecture the world? He growled, though deep in his eyes a flicker of fear flashed. He knew this battle had already surpassed numbers. Aurora was no longer just a CEO. She had become a symbol, and symbols cannot be broken by power or wealth. Edward Whitford stood behind his son, his gaze weary. He sighed softly. Damien, sometimes the greatest loss is not money, but trust, and that is something you never understood. Damien clenched his fists, but found no reply. Back in the hall, Aurora approached the end. Her voice slowed, echoing like the final movement of a symphony. We cannot choose how others treat us, but we can choose how we respond. And I choose never to sell my dignity. I hope, whether you are a business leader, a student, or anyone sitting here today, you will remember, dignity is the most precious asset, never to be traded. Then she bowed deeply. The hall erupted. Applause thundered. Chants rang out. Respect, respect. Thousands rose to their feet, turning the moment into a spiritual earthquake. Aurora lifted her head, eyes glistening. In that moment, she understood. Her story was no longer hers alone. It had become a voice for millions across the world. And from afar, countless cameras streamed her words live, spreading them like a flame no power could extinguish. 3 days after Aurora Miles's speech, the world seemed to awaken from a long slumber. Her words echoed everywhere, from the skyscrapers of New York to the small classrooms of Nairobi. The hashtags, the cost of dignity, and respect is priceless were no longer confined to social media. They appeared on T-shirts, protest banners, even graffiti on market walls. At a university in Boston, thousands of students gathered to replay Aurora's speech on a giant screen. When her voice rang out, "Dignity is never for sale," the entire square erupted in chants of respect. Respect! A young black student, tears rolling down her face, stood and told her friends, "If Aurora can do it, I can stand up against the injustices I face too." In Johannesburg, South Africa, activists hung a banner outside City Hall. "Aurora Miles has proven money cannot buy respect." In Tokyo, major corporations openly quoted her speech in their corporate culture guidelines. Aurora had never called for a movement, yet she had inadvertently sparked a spiritual revolution. Meanwhile, Whitford Group collapsed like a tower, crumbling before the world's eyes. Its stock continued freefall. Media outlets dubbed it the Whitford disaster, one of the gravest moral crises in American business history. Outside the Manhattan headquarters, thousands protested day and night. Their banners blazed, "No justice, no business," and "Boycott Whitford." Broadcasts streamed live, turning the demonstrations into a global symbol. In the boardroom, Edward Whitford sat motionless, his hands trembling as he held the financial report. Every red figure was like a blade, cutting into his pride. He turned to his son, Damien, his eyes filled with both anger and disappointment. "Do you see? We have lost everything. And it all began with you." Damien, his face hollow from sleepless nights, stammered, "I was only joking." Why did people make it such a big deal? Edward let out a bitter laugh. "It wasn't the joke that destroyed us. It was the arrogance in every fiber of your being. You didn't just ruin our family's name. You showed the world that our power was nothing but an empty shell." Damien lowered his head, for the first time in his life, unable to reply. At Axiom Nova's offices, Aurora quietly followed the events. She did not celebrate, did not host a victory party. Instead, she sat with Lena Park and her management team, reviewing each new contract. "We will only sign with partners who truly share our values," Aurora said, her voice steady and resolute. "I will not let Axiom Nova become a hollow symbol that feeds off media hype. If we began with dignity, we must continue with dignity." Lena nodded, her eyes alight. "Aurora, do you know? Today, 3 human rights non-profits sent messages of gratitude. They said your story has given strength to millions who have been silenced." Aurora stayed quiet, her eyes glimmering with emotion. In her heart, she knew she carried a new responsibility, greater than any billion-dollar deal. The press relentlessly published contrasting images. Aurora standing beneath the lights of the stage, cameras surrounding her, and Damien hunched in the shadows of a dark room. A renowned newspaper ran the headline, "Aurora Miles. When one person stands, the whole world lifts its head." At the same time, investors who once saw Whitford as untouchable now publicly withdrew. A European bank declared the end of its partnership. "We cannot work with an organization that does not respect human values." On social media, images of Aurora signing with Northbridge and Helios went viral, side by side with photos of Damien being escorted out of headquarters after an emergency meeting. A cruel contrast, like 2 parallel universes. One evening, Aurora stood by the high-rise window, gazing down at the glowing city. Lena approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Aurora, You've done what no one thought possible. You've turned humiliation into a light guiding the world." Aurora smiled faintly, her eyes pensive. "Lena, I haven't done anything extraordinary. I only lived true to what I believe. But if that helps someone find the strength to rise, then everything I've endured was worth it." Outside, the chants from the square rolled like endless waves crashing on shore. "Respect! Respect! Respect!" Aurora closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. She knew the storm was not over. But now, she was no longer alone. She had the world at her back, and in the darkened room of the Whitford estate, Damien sat alone, staring at screen after screen filled with images of Aurora. Every headline, every word of praise for her, cut into the wound of his pride. He whispered, his voice hoarse. "She really has won." The confession hung in the air, lost in the cold silence of four walls. 1 year after the storm, Los Angeles once again basked in golden sunlight. But for Aurora Miles, everything was different. From a night of humiliation at the Whitford estate, she had walked through the tempest and emerged as a symbol for an entire generation. In the gilded hall of the annual Global Leadership Conference, Aurora's name was called, one of the 100 most influential people on the planet. The room thundered with applause. She stepped onto the stage, tall and graceful, in a simple white dress. The lights shone brightly, but her face was serene, her eyes glowing with steady conviction. Aurora did not speak of money, nor of success. Her voice rang clear, soft yet resolute, flowing like a stream. "I only want to share one thing. There is no victory greater than preserving your dignity. Wealth can be lost and regained. But once you have sold your self-respect, nothing in this world can ever buy it back." The hall rose as one, applause rolling endlessly. In the audience, Lena Park smiled through tears. She knew that her friend, once mocked in university halls, had become a torch lighting the way for millions. Meanwhile, Whitford Group continued to stumble in the shadows. After the crisis, the company was forced into a complete restructuring. Its stock never recovered. Public trust was gone. The once bustling Manhattan headquarters was now bleak, employees moving with anxious faces. In the vast family estate, Edward Whitford sat quietly, his hair far greyer. He stared out at a withering garden, his eyes weary. His son Damien entered. No tuxedo, no champagne glass remained, only a gaunt figure with hollow eyes. "Father," Damien's voice was hoarse. "I was wrong." Edward lifted his gaze, staring directly into his son's eyes. He stayed silent for a long moment, then sighed. "At last you understand. Power is not an inheritance. True power is the respect you build. And that is what you lost." Damien lowered his head, saying nothing. For the first time, real remorse flickered in his eyes. He knew the road to regain trust would be long and harsh, but this time, arrogance was no longer his choice. On the other side of the city, Aurora sat in her high-rise office at Axiom Nova. The city sprawled beneath her, its lights shimmering like stars. On her desk lay files of partnerships with Northbridge, Helios, Wellington, the great names that had replaced Whitford. Each was signed under one condition only: respect for human values. Lena entered, holding an invitation. "Aurora, they want you to speak at the United Nations, on the theme, Dignity in Global Business." Aurora smiled gently, her eyes tender. "I will go. Not to tell my story, but to remind them that it belongs to all who have ever been demeaned." Outside, society still bore its divisions, but Aurora's image had become a symbol of strength for millions. On social media, the hashtag #RespectWins appeared every day, tied to small stories, an employee daring to challenge a domineering boss, a student standing against discrimination in class. Aurora's journey began with a single choice, the choice not to remain silent. And from that choice, the world learned a lesson. Success is not compromise, it is conviction. One evening, as the workday ended, Aurora and Lena stood by the window, gazing out at the city. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of salt from the distant sea. Lena whispered, "Aurora, you've changed this world." Aurora smiled, her eyes gentle yet profound. "No, Lena. I only lived what I believed. The world changed itself when people dared to rise." She turned her gaze to the horizon, blurred in the night's glow. Within her surged an unshakable faith. As long as dignity is preserved, no storm can ever bring you down. At the end of this story, one question lingers, not only for Aurora, not only for Damien, but for us all. If one day you are forced to choose between material gain and dignity, what will you choose? Aurora Miles's story has come to an end, but its echoes still linger. From a night of humiliation, she transformed it into a flame that awakened the world. Aurora proved that money can buy many things, but it can never buy dignity. And what about you? Have you ever faced the choice between holding on to your self-respect or trading it away for gain? Share your experience in the comments, because your voice might inspire someone else. If this story touched your heart, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the journeys ahead, where justice, determination, and dignity remain the truest forms of strength.